Coming up on this special edition of Colonial Crossfire, Robert Mueller completes his report, the debate on border security continues, and an underdog rises in the Democratic field. Joining us on the left, May Viriappa and Nick Kohler. And on the right, Hunter Wilson and Josh KUTNER. And I'm your moderator, Michael Schnell. From the GWTV studios in Washington, D.C., this is Colonial Crossfire. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Colonial Crossfire. So, what was on the minds of the American people this past month? To start, after 22 months of utter silence and high anticipation, the man of the hour, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, completed his report on Russian interference and collusion in the 2016 presidential election. In a bold move, Mueller sent his report to Attorney General William Barr at 5 p.m. on a Friday, leaving the media and the American people wondering, collusion or no collusion? We'll discuss that at length in a little bit. Also this past month, President Trump continued his battle on the southern border. He threatened to shut down the premise, later walking back his words to give Mexico a, quote, one-year warning before taking any action. But before taking a look at these topics in detail, let's go to Jessica Nix to hear some other top headlines. Jessica?
Thanks, Michael. Possible presidential candidate and former Vice President Joe Biden has been accused of inappropriate contact by two women. Amy Lapos added her account of Biden grabbing her neck to rub noses with her in 2009 to Lucy Flores' account of Biden kissing her on the back of the head at a 2014 rally. Both women said the encounters made them feel uneasy and uncomfortable. Biden released a statement saying that he has never acted inappropriately, but if he has, it was never his intention, and he is willing to listen respectfully to anyone who has believed he has acted inappropriately. A Boeing 737 MAX airplane crashed in March, leaving 157 people dead in Ethiopia. This marks the second Boeing 737 crash in 5 months. The first was in Indonesia in October. Both planes crashed within minutes of takeoff, and after the Ethiopian crash, countries across the world grounded the planes. But the United States and the Federal Aviation Administration did not respond. Eventually, the United States did ground the planes, becoming the last country to ground it. Boeing has announced that they are investigating the matter. Celebrity lawyer Michael Avenatti was arrested in New York City last week for charged for extorting millions of dollars from the company Nike. He was released on $300,000 bail. Avenatti was also charged in Southern California for bank and wire fraud charges. Avenatti allegedly filed fake tax returns to obtain $4 million in loans from a Mississippi bank, and he kept $1.6 million that belonged to one of his clients. Avenatti believes that he will be exonerated and the preliminary trials will begin April 29th. A new law in Brunei went into effect on April 3rd that will punish men with death by stoning for adultery or sex between men and the amputation of limbs for theft. The law has received international outcry from celebrities and countries and civil rights groups. The country has said that they have based the Islamic law on the Quran and other writings. The current Sultan of Brunei is one of the wealthiest people on earth and owns multiple hotels across the world, including the Hotel Bel Air in Los Angeles. Celebrities like Ellen DeGeneres and George Clooney have called for a boycott of the hotels. Chicago has elected their first African-American and openly gay woman as mayor on April 2nd. Lori Lightfoot defeated Toni Preckwinkle, also an African-American woman, in a runoff election, with Lightfoot taking the lead in the election with 74% of the vote. While Lightfoot has never held public office, she was a U.S. attorney. Lightfoot has promised to focus on ending City Hall corruption, bringing accountability to City Hall, and restoring people's faith in government. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Jessica. 2 days after the completion of the report, AG Barr sent a 4-page letter to congressional leaders outlining the principal conclusions of the Mueller investigation. The verdict? No collusion, but no definitive answer on obstruction. So, what's next? Our student panel is here to discuss this and more. On the left, May Viriappa, a sophomore from Oklahoma, majoring in political science and fine arts. May is currently the debate director for the GW College Democrats. And Nick Kohler, a freshman from Omaha, Nebraska, studying political science. Nick has worked for congressional candidate Kara Eastman's 2018 campaign and is currently the executive vice president of political affairs for the GW College Democrats. And on the right, Hunter Wilson, a junior from Perrington, Michigan, majoring in political science. Hunter is a former White House intern in the Trump administration and the current vice chairman of the D.C. Federation of College Republicans. And Josh KUTNER, a sophomore from Somerset, New Jersey, majoring in political science. Josh is the Director of Political Affairs for the GW College Republicans. Thank you all for joining us today. 674 days, more than 28,000 subpoenas, 38 requests for communication records, 37 people charged, 7 guilty pleas, 5 prison sentences, all with one special counsel. The Mueller report is finally complete. On March 22nd, Mueller sent his report on Russian hacking and collusion in the 2016 election to AG Bill Barr. After 2 days of examining the more than 300-page report, Barr sent a rather short letter to Capitol Hill. In it, he outlined Mueller's findings of no collusion and explained that while Mueller did not conclude that the president committed a crime, he did not exonerate him in regards to obstruction. This left the media, politicians, and the American people wondering, what else is there to know? Now, with the newly published New York Times report and speculation of if and when the full report will be released, it seems as though the completion of the investigation has spurred more questions than it actually answered. But we're a smart group of people here, so we'll try to plug through those questions and find some answers. May, we'll start with you. Attorney General Barr has received a lot of criticism since the writing of his letter, especially after the New York Times report that said that where Mueller's team, some members of Mueller's team spoke and said that what they found was far more damaging than what Barr had included in his letter. So, do you think that Barr's letter is an attempt to sanitize the report? And do you think that we can point to Barr's letter as a true representation of the Mueller investigation at this point? What are you thinking?
I think overall, there was a little bit of a sanitization of what was really within the report. I think it having a rather short indication of what was actually in the report versus the actual length of the report says a lot. And partly because there is so many questions left for the American people and for Congress in particular that I think that shows and is a lot more significant to show that there was a lack of information within that letter to clarify certain aspects of the investigation.
Nick, fair representation?
I don't believe so. I think that obviously this is a bare bones summary of the actual report itself. Barr actually continuously lobbied for this job. Him and his wife since 1994 have donated $730,000 to GOP candidates and to federal Republicans as well. I believe that this is definitely sort of a diluted, dumbed-down version of the actual report in a sense that there's something there. The key term is does not exonerate. This shows that there is obviously still something that there's still some evidence that Trump could be at fault for some crimes, and that for Barr to come out in his summary and say that this does not exonerate is significant.
Now, we're going to touch on that a little bit later, but Josh, I saw you shaking your head over there. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first, let's just start off by saying that it's a good thing for this country that the special counsel did not find any evidence of the Trump campaign colluding with Russians to interfere in the election. That's a win for all of us. That's a good thing. As far as different leaks coming from the Mueller team now, over the past 2 years, we've seen a lot of leaks that have led to nothing. They've really gotten some of the president's opponents excited for what was to come. It didn't amount to much. So I'm looking forward to seeing the actual report. And bipartisan vote in the House, I think it was like 420 to nothing. They voted to release the full Mueller report. So I think we're going to make judgments of that full report. But I don't think this is some sort of cover-up by the Attorney General trying to hide something. There's only so much you can summarize 400 pages down to 4. I think when we see the full 400 pages, there will be some sort of bits and pieces that Democrats will try to hang on to and investigate. But by and large, not a total exoneration, but definitely a win for not only this president, but this country.
Hunter, care to add?
Yeah, I would, I'd have to agree with a lot of what Josh said. I mean, I wouldn't be one to kind of pick apart the credibility of Bill Barr. He's someone who I think is a great American, great patriot. I mean, he's definitely no Jeff Sessions. He's no political hack, and I think he definitely has the record behind him to kind of back up his judgment. In terms of what you're referencing in terms of the full report, I think it's something that we all want to see. He had even said, the Attorney General, that he's trying to get through all this information as quickly as possible. He's putting out as much as he can as the law allows him to. I mean, I think we're all on the same side in that regard.
So now let's go a little deeper into that question of should it be released and how should it be released. So when Mueller was still deep in his investigation, President Trump commonly referred to the probe as a witch hunt and called Mueller highly conflicted. Then, once the principal conclusions of the investigation were released by Barr, Trump changed his tone, saying that the report should be released and that Mueller is a stand-up guy. Here he is with that mindset.
I don't mind. I mean, frankly, I told the House, if you want, let them see it. I got 63 million votes. And now somebody just writes a report. I think it's ridiculous, but I want to see the report. And you know who want to see it? The tens of millions of people.
But, like we've seen a couple times before, Trump walked back on these statements, belittling congressional Democrats for their efforts to obtain the full report. Hunter, do you think that the report should be released in its entirety, or do you think that there should be some redactions with grand jury testimonies or some confidential, high security information? How do you think it should be released, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I'm someone who wants to see this report, you know, with whatever redactions that need to be made within the letter of the law. I think those need to be made. I think the Department of Justice and the special counsel's team are going through that now in terms of redacting those grand jury.
But part of Mueller's team said that there are about grand jury testimonies on almost all of those pages of report. So when it comes out, if that is the case, then it's very likely that there'll be just blocks of black on each page of the report. So what would we really be learning? What would congressional leaders really be learning if so much of it is redacted?
Yeah, well, I think we have, what, 400 or so pages to sift through here. I'm sure there's a lot of information that we can get through here. I mean, in terms of the soundbite that was played with Trump, you know, I kind of sympathize to a certain extent. You know, he's someone who is a legitimately elected president, you know, as he said, received 63 million votes or whatever the count was. And, you know, from the get-go, he has been kind of belittled with this report hanging over his head, you know, saying like, oh, this is what's going to get him. And now we come out, okay, no collusion, no conspiracy, and he feels that this is a vindication almost on his end. And so he's trying to boast that now while he was trying to downplay it before. I think it just is a testament to where we are politically. I mean, Democrats are doing the same thing, saying we need to, you know, adhere to the findings, and now they're saying, well, you know, we need more evidence, we need more subpoenas, we need all this. So,
Nick, how do you think it should be released in its entirety, redactions? What do you think?
I obviously believe it should be released in its entirety. You know, we have congressional, you know, candidates, we have their staff that would happily work tirelessly to sift through the 400 pages and figure out if justice was obstructed or if there was some sort of collusion that Barr may or may not have said. Just want to point out real quick, Trump actually didn't win the popular vote. He won the Electoral College. So when he boasts about being this great American figure and having 63 million votes, not the entire country voted for him. But that's a separate point. You know, this is something that needs to be taken seriously. This is something that could be detrimental for years and years to come, and that I think that by putting this report down to a summary, down to just a page, or redacting information could be detrimental and could be something that would, you know, have future impacts that would, you know, obviously harm our country.
Josh, anything to add?
Well, I'm just going to say this whole investigation is about upholding the rule of law in this country. And I'm not a legal expert, but if the statutes say that different pieces of grand jury testimony aren't allowed to be included, I think it would be hypocritical to say against the law we should you know, make that information public. If it comes out where there are these massive blocks redacted, we could be looking at a situation where leaders in the different House committees get access to the full report. But I wouldn't want to see the law, the letter of the law, in terms of what can be released due to sensitive legal matters, be compromised in exchange for scoring political points and getting everything released.
May, you have a word on that?
Yeah, absolutely. To echo kind of what my colleague was saying, is that when we release the entire report, I think there will exist some nuances that didn't exist in that 4-letter that Barr had sent to the Congress. And I think releasing it in its entirety would allow the public to see those nuances and make their own judgments on it. I think there's so many questions that are looming over the public's head that even with a redacted version of the report, those questions would still loom over our heads, and that I think is a viable concern, that these nuances that could exist within these possible redacted portions would no longer be able for us to see. And I think those nuances should be up for the public's judgment.
So,
yeah,
no,
I guess if I could just respond to that point. I mean, I agree to a certain extent. You know, like I'm of the belief that Donald Trump did not commit any collusion, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. I want as much of this out as we possibly can, you know, so that people can see, you know, yep, it's definitive. There's nothing, and let's move on and maybe do something, you know, better for the country. Spend our time with, you know. I just agree with Josh. You know, if there's anything that can't be in there, then it can't be in there. You know, that's all.
So on the topic of those redactions, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler on Wednesday, he got the support of the House Judiciary Committee to issue subpoenas to ask for the full Mueller report with no redactions, but he did say that he would hold off on issuing these subpoenas to give Bill Barr, quote, time to change his mind on whether or not he wants to redact the report. Do you think that Nadler will end up issuing those subpoenas? Do you think he won't have to? What's the time frame we're talking about here? Anyone can jump in.
I just don't think it's necessary. I think both Special Counsel Mueller and Attorney General Barr have approached this in a very professional manner. Barr has said, you know, there's 400 pages for him and his team to sift through, so it may take a couple more weeks. He said mid-April, maybe a little earlier. I don't think it'll be necessary. I think this is, again, one of those things that's getting blown out of proportion for political gain, but that the Attorney General has full intentions of releasing as much of the report as he's legally, you know, allowed to.
Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I would rather have the report be released in its entirety just so that we can clear up these loose ends that we're talking about. You know, if the entire report can come out, we can sift through everything, then we can finally have a real sit-down discussion and say, okay, here are the true facts, here are the opinion, you know, here's what Barr said, here's what really happened. They could be the same, they could be different. I'm under the impression that if they release the full report, then we'll have common clarity and it'll be all good from there.
Something tells me, though, that even if the full report were to be released, you know, you'd have Democrats and, you know, Judiciary Committee folks on the left still not necessarily happy with something. You know, here we have the Barr memo come out on the report, you know, says no conspiracy, not enough evidence for obstruction, and here we are with, you know, they're like almost grabbing at any loose ends that they can. You know, let's subpoena Hope Hicks, let's subpoena Steve Bannon, let's get as many people as we can. Hopefully, you know, we'll just start throwing darts at a wall and something will stick. You know, I just don't know if it's worth our time here. Let the Department of Justice, let the special counsel do their work, and we'll see what we end up with in a couple of weeks here.
So another aspect of this investigation that's kind of caught a lot of buzz is that the fact that the president never had a formal sit-down interview with the special counsel's team. He just submitted those written answers to those questions that were crafted with a team of lawyers. So I want to know what you guys are thinking here. Why don't you think that he sat down with the special counsel's team? What do you think this means? Not to have a face-to-face conversation, but rather to have scripted, written, answered with a lawyer. What does that say about the investigation? How does it affect it? Bit of an open-ended question, but I want to get your thoughts here. Anyone can jump in first.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the president has a propensity to, you know, use hyperbole and not tell the complete truth in terms of, I don't think it's a malicious attempt when he does it. I think, you know, his campaign trail mode, he tends to exaggerate, and when you do that on the campaign trail, it may rile the crowd up. But when you do it in legal proceedings, it could cause some real issues for you, especially when you have, you know, an entire political machine out against you. So, you know, I trust that Mueller's team handled themselves professionally and knew what they were doing. And this decision, you know, there's so many aspects of that decision we don't know as the public, and I trust Mueller's team of professionals that they made the right choice in the end.
Is that an excuse, though? This investigation is about him. It's about how the Russians interfered with his campaign, with his election, and for his excuse to not sit down with an interview because he hyperbolizes ideas and facts. Do you think that's a valid excuse for him not sitting down with the president? For not sitting down with the special counsel's team?
I would also say, I mean, if it were me, I'd be just worried of a perjury trap, I mean, in general. I mean, no matter what Trump would say in that interview, you know, there would be words, well, he said this word before that word, and that means that, you know, he actually meant this. And it's, I would be very wary of, you know, sitting down with the special counsel. I would provide, you know, any information needed or necessary, but that's what I'd be worried about. The political establishment in Washington are trying to get Trump, I think, in any way possible. And so I wouldn't create more instances where I could potentially, be at it.
May, Nick, I'm curious to hear about what your thoughts are.
I personally find some of the remarks about what you guys have said personally really concerning, that he hyperbolizes so much that he's unable to sit down with the special counsel and hold an interview. These are significant charges that he is being accused of, and this is very, very different from a speech that he gives to a crowd, to the public, in order to garner votes. This is about crimes, and it's about a serious investigation. And by nature, what he would be saying or should be saying should be a factual statement, and it's very different from a point of view of persuasion. And so if he would come to an interview face-to-face from a point of factual investigation, it shouldn't come from this point of trying to persuade and garner votes, which is a very different natured speech. And so these significant charges, I find it very concerning that he was simply unable to answer questions in person without the help of like an entire team. And I think that again, this causes a huge question among the American public of, well, why could he not have this interview face to face?
Hunter, you're shaking your head. You want to jump in there a bit?
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's just more so fundamental disagreement. I was thinking, back to Bill Clinton and the special counsel, and like I was saying in terms of tearing apart words, when President Clinton was up there and like, well, it depends on what the definition of is, and it's just like I don't know if these are the kind of debates that are necessary to move forward with this. I say, let the people do their job. I honestly have full faith in Robert Mueller. I have full faith in Bob Barr. I think these are people who are not political types. I don't know. I guess that's all I'd have to add.
Yeah, Josh.
And this isn't to say that he'd be unable to answer these questions, but if you were to put yourselves in the shoes of Trump's legal team, knowing his style, they're just trying to do their best job to serve their client, and I think it's totally fair for them to try to, answer this via written form rather than leave things up for chance.
So I'm going to cut you off there, and we're going to move on to our last question real quick. The Mueller report is finally complete. It's been almost 2 years, and it's done. It's been handed in. Principal conclusions are out. We've been talking about this for a very long time, this investigation, and now that the results are in, how do you think this will affect 2020? I want to hear from all of you really quickly, 30 seconds. Nick, we'll start with you.
Definitely think for 2020, if the full report actually does come out, then this will have a completely different rhetoric than if it's just a summary. If it's just a summary, I think Democrats are honestly going to be more upset than if the actual full report is released. As we talked about, just the summary is really diluted, bare bones of the actual report itself. So I think we should wait and see if the actual report comes out.
May?
I think it'll have a significant impact on 2020. I think this will have an impact on the public's opinion on not only the president, but also of the Republican Party, and also how, depending on how Democrats move forward in dealing with the Mueller report, will also impact how voters see the Democratic Party.
Josh, I think you may have a different perspective.
It's going to have zero impact on the 2020 election, in my opinion. We're going to get the full report. There's going to be pretty much nothing in terms of hard evidence of any crimes committed by the president, allegedly. And people on the left will find something to grasp onto, and they will still hate him with a passion for hundreds of other reasons. And people on the right will still support him. If anything, the polling has shown no effect in general elections, maybe a slight bump in the president's approval since the release. So I think statistically it's going to be negligible.
Hunter, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I memean, you've seen the president's favorability ratings, like in one poll, reach 50%, which hasn't happened in quite some time. It'll have a slight impact, maybe, just in terms of it gives more teeth to Trump in saying, I've been telling you, it's been nothing for 2 years, and here we are now, and there's nothing.
All right, and we'll have to end our segment there. But after this, we'll head over to the U.S.-Mexico border and discuss the new conversation regarding immigration. Stay with us.
And this is GWTV.
You nailed that. Good job, guys.
Welcome back. We're now going to head down to the south, to the U.S.-Mexico border, to break down the latest on the immigration debate. On April 1st, President Trump threatened to seal the southern border in addition to cutting hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to Central American countries. However, just days later, the president once again pulled a 180 and reversed his stance. He announced that he would give Mexico a, quote, one-year warning to address his concerns regarding immigration before he would take the necessary steps to rectify those issues. This situation has illustrated some conflict within the Republican Party, including disagreements between the president and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. When the president from the Oval Office said he would, quote, 100% close the border, McConnell, who happened to be less than 2 miles down Pennsylvania Avenue, voiced his concerns on the incoming issue, saying that taking action of this matter would cause a, quote, catastrophic economic impact. Now, it's been 2 years since Trump started chanting, "Build that wall," at campaign rallies, but where are we now? Let's jump right into it. Hunter, we'll start with you. So the president said he would give Mexico a one-year warning on immigration and see what he would do. Why do you think Trump went back on this stance? Why do you think he decided to not shut down the border right now, but kind of give Mexico some time to think about things?
Yeah, well, President Trump himself has said that there would be a slight economic impact if the border were to be closed. You know, that's kind of a given in that respect, but he said, you know, national security is his foremost concern, and that's what he's looking to right now. And I think he's been in talks with the Mexican president and leaders in Mexico about revamping how they apprehend people on their side of the border in coming through different ports of entry and in different parts.
May, what do you think? He went back on his stance. How do you feel about that?
I think this is a clear pattern of what President Trump has continuously done, where he'll say drastic and hyperbolic phrases and then realize how impossible enacting such a policy would be, and then went on his stance. And I think we've seen this time and time again. I mean, this is a bit of a personal opinion, but I just feel that he continuously will say, especially on immigration, continuously will say buzzwords in order to spark rhetoric and spark buzzwords for him and his constituents in order to fire them up again and show support again. And I think that has continuously been an issue for him. And so I feel like a lot of the rhetoric that he has said initially about, you know, sealing the border, I think he knows that it's simply impossible to do that right now. And again, as mentioned before, the economic impact would be incredible. So
I'm going to cut you off there. I want Nick to get in there a bit. What do you think about this?
I definitely think that this is just another one of Trump's ploys. You know, he wants to appeal to his voters, wants to appeal to his base, and says, we're going to shut down the border, you know, we're going to go to the extremes, and then once people calm him down and say, hey, you can't do that, is when he has to kind of go in a 180 and say, oh, well, we'll give them a one-year warning so that this is sort of a warning to Mexico. It's obviously not smart. The economic impacts itself would be detrimental. One statistic I looked up is that the automobile industry would almost go bankrupt within weeks. That, you know, almost 80% of the cars in the U.S. at least take parts from Mexico, and that by shutting down the border completely, it wouldn't allow for trade. Obviously, avocados, and like the joke is that avocado toast, that millennials wouldn't have their avocado toast. That's also like a real concern.
It's a big deal. Avocados are pretty good.
Oh, 100%. I love guacamole, but like obviously importing that into the U.S. wouldn't be allowed if the actual border is sealed. So it's obviously not smart. It's over a president that has been crying since day one about shutting down the border. This is him still trying to reach that final goal.
So let's talk consequences, let's talk implications. If he does shut down the border, seal the border rather, whether it's now, whether it's in a year from now, 2 years from now, whenever it is, what would be the long-term, short-term consequences of this move? Republicans, will go to you first.
I don't think it's just rhetoric, but I also don't know if he has intent on following through. I think it's one of his hardline negotiation tactics that worked for him in business, and he's trying to get it to work in the political sphere, and we'll see what happens with U.S.-Mexico relations. If he were to shut down the border, I think besides the economic effects, you would see an adverse effect with the problem we've been talking about for the past few months with illegal immigration, when you're closing off the ports of entry, that's gonna kind of funnel people, if I had to guess, I'm not an expert on the topic, but, towards areas of the border that are unsecure, and that's the last thing we want, especially with the vast portions of our border that have no barriers at the moment.
I'm going to cut you off.
Yeah.
Dems, what do you think?
Well, definitely like what you talked about with by shutting down the border and pushing them towards parts of the border that aren't sealed, that's going to be detrimental in the fact that these immigrants will end up only risking their lives more, dying in the desert from lack of food, lack of water, in order to try to come to America for a better life. And that if Trump shuts down the border for legal ports of entries, it will again force these individuals to go to the unsafe route, the detrimental route. And that, as you said, this is a business tactic he's used. You know, you can sort of threaten, you can say what you want in hopes that they'll fold, but in regards to the American people and how it'll actually work in American society, it's not going to. So Trump has to take this 180 return, step back, sort of reevaluate, and go from there.
All right, well, we'll have to have the last word on that, but after this break, it's rapid fire. Stay tuned.
Do you want to just practice fake headlines, do our anchor voices?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Okay.
On this week's episode of G Week, there is another election scandal.
And former Vice Provost Peter Kay has been spotted back on campus rocking a brand new bandana. Boy, does he look sharp.
And this year's Spring Fling performer is anticipated to be none other than the Cash Me Outside girl, Behad Behabi.
Catch all of this and more on G Week.
Yeah, this is stuff that would probably happen at GW.
Yeah, I think so too.
Our panel joins us now again for rapid fire. Some quick answers to some quick questions. On March 16th, a man opened fire at 2 Christchurch mosques in New Zealand, killing 50 innocent people and injuring 50 more. Within 10 days of this massacre, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern pledged to announce, quote, reforms which will, I believe, make our community safer. She delivered on this promise, banning all military-style semi-automatic weapons, assault rifles, and high-capacity magazines. May, we'll start with you. What kind of reflection do you think this is on the United States? The fact that after one mass shooting, that New Zealand government was able to pass comprehensive gun reform, while in the U.S., after 20 years of having mass shootings, we've only been able to pass one form of gun control, banning bump stocks. And so what kind of reflection do you think this is on the U.S.?
Unfortunately, I think this does reflect poorly on the United States. I mean, mass shootings have continuously become a part of our everyday news line, and I think that's incredibly unfortunate. And the fact that our actions haven't really reflected the atrocities that have resulted in these deaths have really been something really shocking for me to see, and to see how another country has reacted in such a stark and different way makes me really reflect on the United States poorly, unfortunately, and how maybe our policies on gun control have simply not received the amount of attention and aggressive policy behavior that has really reflected on just the continuous amount of victims in gun violence, amount of victims in mass shootings.
Nick, what's your reaction?
I think that New Zealand went from the stance of skipping thoughts and prayers and moments of silence to actually enacting change. I think that they sort of set the tone for American politics, that it's become almost an everyday reality for American school children of mass shootings, it went from duck and cover to lockdown drills. And that I think that when this happened in New Zealand, they said, well, this isn't going to happen again. You know, we have this saying in America, never again, but they actually made sure that this will probably never happen again. Instead of just saying the same rhetoric and, you know, going back on our words and not passing comprehensive common sense gun reform, you know, New Zealand actually took that necessary step and did so in a respectable and legislative manner.
Hunter, what are you thinking?
I mean, in my opinion, you know, coming from a small town in the middle of Michigan, you know, where hunting is part of our everyday life, and you know, it's just how people are. You know, this of course I think reflects more negatively on New Zealand than the United States. I think that this is a very knee-jerk reaction to this shooting. I mean, we need to be looking at things like, how did this shooter obtain 5 guns legally and have permits for them, rather than, you know, coming up with, you know, buyback or confiscation schemes to just completely, get rid of semi-automatic weapons to a certain extent. I mean, in terms of the United States, what we need to do is, actually start looking at things like, making sure that states put in felony records into the National Instant Background Check system. I mean, the system is only as good as the information that's in it, and we need to be making sure that people who shouldn't get guns don't get guns, not just ban them all entirely.
Josh?
Well, when I was on the show last, it was right after the Pittsburgh shooting, and here we are again after another attack on people of faith in their house of worship. It's a sad state of affairs, and all of our condolences go out to the families affected in New Zealand. I don't think it's quite fair to say there's been no progress on gun control in the United States. As you mentioned, the Trump administration took the lead on banning bump stocks. The Republican Congress passed Fix NICS, and that got instituted into law. We have a long way to go. There are many reforms we can look at, but I also don't think it's fair to extrapolate between New Zealand, what's going on there, to the United States. We have an entirely different culture, entirely different trends in gun ownership.
All very interesting, fair perspectives. We're going to now move on to 2020. Now, March 31st marked the first quarter fundraising deadline for 2020 candidates, and boy, do they know how to fundraise. In these first 3 months, the top 4 Democratic candidates raised nearly $50 million. One of the more surprising candidates in this top 4 was the underdog mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Pete has surprised many with his large following and fundraising attention. Hunter, we'll ask you first. What are your thoughts on Buttigieg? What are your thoughts on his ability to get so much fundraising and a lot of attention, being such a small candidate and underdog from Indiana? And then a more broad question I want to hear from all of you. Who do you think the 2020 Dem nominee will actually be?
Well, Mayor Pete, I mean, he's the only one of the Democratic candidates I follow on Twitter.
That says something.
Yeah, no, I mean, he, in my opinion, is the strongest in the field. As a Republican, he's the only one that I'd be afraid of in terms of a general election matchup against the president. And you can see in terms of his fundraising numbers, here is this, no-name mayor from South Bend, competing with Senator Warren, and in terms of polls and things like that. So, I mean, I think he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. I've been saying it for a month or so now, but I mean, he's got something about him. I don't know if what that's going to look like in a general election matchup, but he's definitely an impressive candidate.
All right, we'll go down the line. Josh, you next.
I'd caution against reading too much into the early fundraising numbers. At this point in the race in 2016, the candidate being renowned for how he was locking up all the major donors was Jeb Bush, and we know how that went. So, while it's impressive for Mayor Pete, he'll certainly, if he were to be the nominee, would be tough to define given his lack of national record. I think that the Democrats would be foolish not to pick Joe Biden as their 2020 nominee. I think he'd sweep the Midwest, and that would get them the presidency. I don't see many other candidates who have the name recognition and ability to win over moderates in the Midwest to get the presidency.
May, what do you think of Mayor Pete?
I don't really have a strong opinion yet, to be quite honest. I think that there is something to say that he raised so much money, but again, I'm going to follow the same rhetoric where I know that sometimes that may not be telling later on down the campaign. When it comes to terms of who I think will be the 2020 nominee, again, I'm also very unsure. I think there's some great names right now on the board that have really great name recognition. You have Sanders, you have Biden, obviously. But again, things come out during campaigns, especially towards the latter half of the campaign. So there are a lot of unexpected things that could occur. I think 2016 says a lot about that as well. So maybe that just had a personal effect on me, but I don't really know who will be the nominee.
All right, Nick?
I'm kind of in the same boat. I think Mayor Pete is starting to grow on me. He's doing really well in Iowa, which is obviously right next to where I live. His fundraising numbers are actually pretty amazing. Personally, I know you said Biden. I'm not the biggest fan of Biden. I don't think his treatment of Anita Hill was in any way appropriate, especially during the Senate hearings. I like Elizabeth Warren. It's also upsetting to see how the Democrats have kind of turned on her about her quote about being 1,024th Native American. That was an issue, yes, but I think we need to look past that. And I also think that whoever ends up being the candidate in 2020, the Democrats need to get behind. Personally, I'd like to see somebody who's obviously more left. Trump has gone really far right and polarized. I don't want to see us sort of gradually go towards that center. I want to see someone that can combat him on the opposite side.
All right, so March just passed, so you all know what that means. The season that may be a little crazier than U.S. election season, but you guys can take your thoughts on that, is March Madness is in full swing. The upsets have been real in this year's season, and many brackets were busted after just the first day. So, I want to hear from all you guys. Who is going to win? Josh, you can have the first word.
Well, admittedly, I didn't pay enough attention this year as I should have.
Oh, my.
But that being said, as I mentioned way too often, I'm from Jersey. I'm a big Rutgers fan, so I'll go with the Big Ten, Michigan State Spartans.
Okay.
That's who I'll pick.
Hunter?
As well as a proud Michigander myself, I mean, I think we all know that Michigan State is going to win in the end. So
Okay.
that's my pick.
May?
I unfortunately simply do not have any opinion. I don't follow sports, but I empower anyone who does.
Fair answer. Nick, you can have the last word.
You know, I picked Duke because I thought the RJ Barrett-Zion duo was going to do it, but Michigan State continuously blew out teams left and right, and they ended up beating Duke, so I think they for sure have the best chance of winning.
Bipartisanship, look at that.
See that right there?
We did something. Good job.
I picked Duke too. I've been done since the first set. But anyway, guys, that's going to end our debate there. Nick, May, Josh, Hunter, thank you guys so much for joining us today. And when we come back, LARAGH Cronin has our debate fact check. Stay with us.
Hi, Colonials. Did you know there are hundreds of ways for you to volunteer with GW? Each year, over 1,500 alumni, parents, and friends contribute thousands of hours to make our community stronger. There are countless ways you can volunteer, so it's easy to choose an opportunity that is most meaningful to you, like connecting with students and alumni based on your student involvement, identity, or personal interests, getting involved with your local alumni network, mentoring a current student via our online mentoring platform, connecting with prospective students through undergraduate admissions opportunities, serving on an industry network leadership council, becoming a social media ambassador. The list goes on. No matter where you are in the world or how much time you have to give, you can connect and volunteer with GW. And the best part, it's easy to get involved. Just visit alumni.gwu.edu/volunteer to learn more about these and other opportunities. Because of your service to GW, you are able to make a direct impact on the lives of former, current, and future students. We look forward to working with you. Raise high.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact checkers monitored our debate. LARAGH Cronin is here to fill us in on what we missed. Lara?
Thanks, Michael. In today's show, the debaters came prepared, but there are a few quick clarifications that need to be made. At one point during the debate, Nick said that Attorney General William Barr's wife had donated $730,000 to federal Republican candidates and conservative groups. To clarify, Christine Barr has given more than $220,000, and William Barr has donated more than $567,000 in the past 2 decades. Nick later said that the automobile industry would go bankrupt within weeks if the border shut down, and that 80% of car imports come from Mexico. Although it is true that the industry would struggle and go bankrupt in weeks, it is 80% of the wire harnesses, a specific auto part, used to make cars that cross the U.S.-Mexico border, 70% of which originate in Mexico and 10% come from Central and South America. To clarify, only about 16% of all auto parts used in the United States originate in Mexico. Nick also said that immigration was at an all-time low, 11% in 2017. Nick was correct in citing falling immigration rates, but sources differ on the exact percentage rate of that decline. According to Customs and Border Protection, arrests along the southwest border numbered about 400,000 in fiscal year 2018. That's lower than the average over the previous decade. It is also lower than the number of border arrests in fiscal year 2016, 2014, and 2013. Josh cited President Trump saying that 4,000 people cross over the border each day. Federal agents apprehended more than 4,000 migrants crossing the border on each of 2 days in late March, but statistics differ on how many people actually cross the border each day. Finally, Josh said that Democrats voted down a package of relief for Puerto Rico. The Senate blocked billions of dollars in disaster aid for states across the country. Both Republicans and Democrats clashed over President Trump's opposition to sending more food and infrastructure help to Puerto Rico. That's all from the fact check team. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Lara. All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire and for Colonial Crossfire Season 9. Before we wrap up today's show, I want to say thank you to the geniuses in the control room behind the glass, our executive producers, Haley Oland and Izzy Cassandra Newsome. Thank you guys for everything. This show would not be how it is without you, and we would not be able to put on such an amazing show every month without you guys. I also want to say thank you to the Colonial Crossfire team who helps put together our show, and of course, GWTV. Thank you for everything. Be sure to check us out online, as always, at www.gw-tv.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram and like us on Facebook. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Michael Schnell. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. Good luck on finals, have a nice summer, and we'll see you right back here in the fall.